back to Weekly. Joining me now to chat about Facebook, social media companies, who owns your personal data, and how who owns that personal data impacts these stocks is Kim Bolton, the president and portfolio manager at Black Swan Dexteritas, a hedge fund based here in Toronto. Kim, thanks for joining me again on Weekly.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for having me back.
So you manage a technology hedge fund. You're a great guy to ask what's going on with this Facebook kerfuffle, shall we call it. Let's start with 101s. How do these social media systems work?
Okay. Andrew, it's still a young industry, but think about it in terms of when you go onto a social media website or into a data processing internet website, you're getting free data, free information. Now, nothing's free in this world, so you have to pay for it somehow, and they pay for it by putting ads on there. And now the issue is who owns that data? Does the data for you, the person going onto the website, onto the social media site, is it your data? Is it the advertiser's data? And so now it's all coming to roost that there has to be some rules around how the data is actually managed.
But when I signed up to use any of these sites, I have effectively not read the fine print and agree, and consequently what Facebook is doing is perfectly legal.
That's right. And it's and they take that data. So there's a disclaimer that is actually given to you. And then you sign off, agree, disagree. If you agree, then you proceed. And then, but there are different kinds, different types of social media and data processing companies. There are open sites, and then there are closed sites.
What's the difference?
And the difference is that the open is your data is actually can be used by other sources. Closed means that the data is only for that site. Great example would be like LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a closed system. Another system on a social media stand is like Telegram. Telegram is a social media site where it doesn't have any advertisers, and the data is owned by Telegram and therefore the subscribers.
But Facebook would be closed also in the sense that only the owner of that site has full access to the data.
Correct.
And they also have control to who has access to the data, whereas an open site, shall we call it, like a browser.
Right, like a Google.
Right, is open,
Yep.
and other people have access to that data.
Right, and in open, there are traces that you can sort of follow, called cookies.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And so those cookies are stored, and you can actually follow that.
So when you look at Twitter versus Facebook, it strikes me that there's not a lot of personal information about me on Twitter.
And likewise, there isn't as much advertising on the Twitter.
But then when you look at Facebook, a lot of folks that use Facebook will have signed up for Instagram, for WhatsApp,
Messenger,
and Facebook.
Yeah.
And a lot of those folks probably don't even know that Instagram is owned by Facebook. But when you look at the guy or gal who signed up for all of those services, Facebook effectively knows what they're doing every point in time during the day, because you do a WhatsApp during the day, you'll update your Facebook profile at night, and hey, you might take a picture the odd time during the day on Instagram.
That's right, and Facebook has their own developers, and they'll actually manage that data, and they'll have algorithms to actually drill down and look for patterns out there. But sometimes they'll go out and they'll outsource that data. And they'll actually have an agreement with someone to actually outsource, and they can actually develop macros and look for patterns.
Now, in that example, Facebook may sign a deal with a third party, like you're talking about, that gives that third party access to 30% of the information they got on me, 100% of the information that they've got on me. What's happened in this situation is that third party, that authorized third party, then provided access to that information to an unauthorized third party, correct?
Correct.
Right, okay. Now, Amazon, what you just said about Facebook, where does Amazon fit into that picture? What do they do?
Well, Amazon is more like an eBay. And so it's a shopping site. And yes, they actually collect data, but the data is sort of like a hybrid between an open and a closed system.
But there's no advertising from outside sources on Amazon. They seem to make recommendations to me.
That's right.
Right.
And that's where it sort of gets into the fine print, whether it's Amazon or whether it's Google, because they're large organizations that actually do searches for you, but then they actually have their own proprietary shopping area. And that is a problem. Google ran into it this past year over in Europe, where they actually found that Google was, you'd go in and do a search, and then they direct you to the Google shopping center.
Right. Okay. So please provide me with some numbers that indicate the differences in the business model based on what we've been talking about, the monetization of personal data of a Facebook versus a Google versus an Amazon.
So Facebook, they have revenue of about $13 to $14 billion every quarter.
Right.
Well, for the past 2 quarters. And it's been growing at about 40% year over year. Of that, 92% of those revenues are coming from ads.
Okay.
Okay? Google, on the other hand, has 3 sort of business units. They make about $32 billion per quarter coming from their network. Then they have about from their Google sites. Then they have about 15% coming from networks, and then Google has this other area called other bets, where there's about another 15%. So it's more widely spread. But when it goes 70% of Google's revenues is coming from its Google site, not as much as Facebook.
So advertising would be what percent of Google's revenues?
70%.
70%. Okay. And then Amazon is a different equation. Twitter
is doesn't have as much revenues coming from ads. It only has about 300 million subscribers, monthly subscribers. You look at Facebook, it has 1.2 billion.
And operating margins?
Operating margins for Facebook is running at around 50 to 55%. Twitter is more closer down to around 35 to 40.
Interesting. Okay, so that's a little bit of a setup for what we're going to talk about after the break, and we're going to talk about what comes next for Facebook and social media in using your personal information. You're watching Weekly on BNN.